in 1971. Two men with the names founded a company named Suzuki Engineering. Both of them had similar interests in games. That is why they created a game called Computer Space in 1971, which also became the world's first commercially available arcade video game. You could play this game on a large custom fiberglass cabinet. Nolan Bushnell was the one that designed this, mostly to make it look futuristic. After a while, they realized another company had the same name as them. That's why they changed it to Atari. Just 1 year later, a game console called the Magnavox Odyssey was released. This console inspired Atari, so in 1972 they made an iconic arcade video game named Pong. Pong was the first commercially successful video game and paved the way for Atari and Magnavox Odyssey. Although Magnavox actually sued Atari for stealing the concept of their Pong. Atari could have won the lawsuit, although this would have costed over $1.5 million. So Atari and Magnavox settled for an agreement. But in the end, Atari still had to give Magnavox $1.5 million. Fast forward to 1975, Atari created a game console for the Pong game, called the Home Pong, enabling people to play Pong without being in an arcade. The Home Pong became a commercial success, did well and managed to sell over 150,000 units. Atari made the Atari 2600 in 1977. At launch, the Atari 2600 had a very reasonable price at $199, which is equivalent to almost $900 today. The Atari console had 528 games to choose from, and the console became a massive success, selling over 30 million units. In fact, it was so successful that the name Atari almost became a synonym for video games in general. Bushnell sold the company to Warner Communications in 1977 for $28 million, but he said later that he shouldn't have done it. 2 years later, in 1979, Atari introduced its first 8-bit home computers, the Atari 400 and the Atari 800. At this time, the new CEO of the company was Ray Kassar. Kassar saw an opportunity to make money from the home computer era that had just begun. He wanted to challenge Apple, who had just launched its Apple II home computer. They released multiple games for the Atari 400 and 800, but home computers were still not cheap. The Atari 400 was sold at a staggering $550 at launch, which is around $2,000 today. Not only that, the Atari 400 was the cheaper one. The Atari 800 was launched at $1,000, which is around $3,700 today. In 1982, Atari released their new console, the Atari 5200. The graphics and CPU were almost identical to the home computers. But then, the video game industry was hit by the video game crash of 1983. Revenues of the game industry had peaked at around $3.2 billion, but then fell down to around $100 million by 1985. This is a drop of almost 97% in 2 years. The Atari 5200 in the end became a failure and sold only around 1 million units. The Atari 7800 was released in 1986, and this was the first console featuring backwards compatibility, which meant that people with the Atari 7800 could play almost every game the Atari 2600 had. At the end of the day, it sold around 3.8 million units. In 1989, a new console entered the stage. This console was the first handheld with a color LCD screen, and it was the Atari Lynx. But the Atari Lynx had a big competitor, the Game Boy. Both Atari and Sega didn't stand near the success level of the Nintendo Game Boy. The Game Boy was almost $100 cheaper than the Lynx, while the Lynx also had the shortest battery life. It sold around 3 million units, compared to the Nintendo Game Boy selling almost 120 million units. The next console is the Atari Jaguar in 1993. At this time, Nintendo and Sega had just released their new consoles, but the developers of the Atari Jaguar were certain that they could make the Jaguar way better than the SNES and the Genesis, although they made some mistakes. The price of $250 was $50 more than the SNES and $60 more than the Genesis. Not only that, only around 50 games were released for the Jaguar, which is around 1,700 games less than the SNES. They did make a CD version of the Jaguar, but only 12 CD games were released for it. Only 150,000 units of the Atari Jaguar were sold, which is the worst of any console in Atari history. The Sega Genesis sold 30 million units, and the SNES sold 50. Atari was probably so embarrassed that they left the console market for 11 years. In 2004, Atari released its new Atari Flashback. This was basically a smaller version of the Atari 7800, but it sold for only $45 at launch, and had 20 games, 15 from the Atari 2600 and 5 from the 7800. Around 500,000 units of the Flashback were sold, but they weren't done. The Flashback 2 came out 1 year later, and had double the games for a lower price at just $30 at launch. In the US, the Atari Flashback 2 sold almost 900,000 units. Atari kept releasing more Flashbacks, over 10 to be exact. The latest of these was the Flashback X, released in 2019. It features 2 controllers and 110 games. One of the latest consoles of Atari is the Atari VCS. It has many different modern games. It costs $299 for the console. The controllers make the price $399, and with some games, the end price is maybe $449. But they have one last console, and this is the Atari 2600 Plus. It came out in November 2023, and is an emulation device, which means it can behave just like another device. This device can play both Atari 2600 and 7800 games on the same console, just for the price of $129. I did mention Sega in this video, but what really is it? Click this video to find out, and I will have you another time.